Iran destroys 5 U.S. helicopters over Strait of Hormuz, shouting Pentagon in panic. The world held its breath today in one of the most shocking military confrontations between the United States and Iran in decades. 5 American attack helicopters were destroyed over the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most strategically vital waterways on the planet. Multiple defense sources has sent shockwaves through the Pentagon, rattled global oil markets, and placed the entire Middle East on the edge of a precipice. This was not a skirmish. This was not a warning shot. This was a direct, calculated strike against United States military assets in international waters. Within hours, the Pentagon was in crisis mode. Emergency sessions were convened. Regional commanders were placed on high alert, and the world began asking the question no one wants to answer: is this the moment that changes everything? The Strait of Hormuz carries nearly 20% of the world's oil supply. What happens there does not stay there. If this story matters to you, and it should, subscribe now, because this is only the beginning. To understand what happened over the Strait of Hormuz today, you have to go back not just weeks, but decades. The United States and Iran have been locked in a cold war of proxy battles, sanctions, and near-miss military confrontations since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. For over 40 years, the Strait of Hormuz has been the pressure valve of that conflict, the one geographic choke point where Iranian military ambition and American naval power have repeatedly collided. In 2019, Iran shot down a U.S. surveillance drone over the strait. Washington came within minutes of launching retaliatory strikes before pulling back. In January 2020, the assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani pushed both nations to the brink. Iran retaliated with ballistic missile strikes on U.S. bases in Iraq. Then came the shadow war with Iranian-backed militias targeting American forces across the region. U.S. carrier groups repositioned. Tensions never truly cooled. In recent months, U.S. military helicopter patrols over the strait had intensified as part of a broader freedom of navigation operation. Iran had publicly warned Washington to pull back. Washington did not pull back. Today, those warnings became action. Here is what we know and what remains dangerously unclear. According to U.S. defense officials, 5 American attack helicopters believed to be AH-64 Apache units operating from a nearby naval vessel were conducting a routine freedom of navigation patrol over the Strait of Hormuz when they were engaged by Iranian forces. The strike was swift, coordinated, and deliberate. The Pentagon confirms the helicopters were destroyed. Casualty figures have not been officially released. That silence speaks volumes. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, has claimed full responsibility. Iranian state media is framing the strike as a defensive response to what they call repeated American provocations in sovereign Iranian airspace. Tehran insists the helicopters crossed a designated exclusion zone that Iran had formally declared weeks earlier. Washington categorically rejects that claim. U.S. Central Command states the helicopters were operating in international airspace well within established freedom of navigation parameters, and that the Iranian strike constitutes an unprovoked act of aggression against American military personnel. 2 narratives, one catastrophic outcome, or what the evidence does confirm, including radar tracking data, satellite imagery, and intercepted communications, is that this strike was not accidental. It was planned, it was coordinated, and it was executed with precision that suggests months of preparation. This was a decision made at the highest levels of the Iranian government. To truly grasp the magnitude of what just happened, you need to understand exactly what the Strait of Hormuz represents, not just symbolically, but operationally. The strait is a narrow ribbon of water, barely 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, separating Iran from the Arabian Peninsula. Yet, through that corridor flows approximately 20% of the world's entire oil supply. Every single day, tankers carrying Saudi, Emirati, Kuwaiti, and Iraqi crude pass through those waters. Close the strait even partially, and the global economy convulses. For the United States military, the strait is not just a trade route, it is a forward operating theater. American naval assets positioned there project power across the entire Persian Gulf region, deterring Iranian expansion, protecting allied shipping lanes, and maintaining pressure on Tehran's nuclear ambitions. The 5 helicopters destroyed today were not random patrol units. Apache attack helicopters operating in that corridor serve a critical intelligence and rapid response function. They are the eyes and the teeth of American naval operations in the region. By targeting those specific assets Iran sent a precise, calculated message, not just to Washington, but to every American ally in the Gulf, including Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Israel, and Bahrain, which hosts the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters. The message was unmistakable. American military dominance in this region is no longer guaranteed. That shifts the entire strategic balance of the Middle East. The intelligence community is not mincing words today. According to assessments circulating within U.S. defense and intelligence circles, this strike represents the most significant direct Iranian military action against American forces since the ballistic missile attack on Al-Assad Air Base in January 2020. The level of coordination involved, including electronic warfare, surface-to-air missile deployment, and real-time targeting of moving aerial assets, points to capabilities that Iran has been quietly developing and concealing for years. Analysts at leading international security institutions warn that this was not an impulsive act. The operational sophistication required to simultaneously engage and destroy 5 maneuvering attack helicopters suggests extensive pre-planning, rehearsal, and intelligence gathering on American patrol patterns. Military analysts with deep experience in Persian Gulf operations note that Iran has fundamentally altered the rules of engagement in the Strait. For decades, American forces operated under the assumption that Iran would stop short of directly destroying U.S. military hardware. That assumption is now shattered. Experts at prominent Washington-based foreign policy institutes are drawing urgent comparisons to historical escalation flashpoints, where a single military incident triggered cascading consequences that neither side fully anticipated or controlled. Perhaps most alarming is the assessment from former senior intelligence officials who note that strikes of this nature are never unilateral decisions within the Iranian system. This action would have required direct authorization from Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei himself. This was a decision made at the very top. But the other side has a point, and responsible analysis demands we examine it seriously. Iran's position, stripped of the propaganda framing and state media theatrics, contains elements that cannot simply be dismissed. Tehran has repeatedly and formally protested what it describes as aggressive American military encroachment in waters it considers within its defensive perimeter. Those protests were lodged through diplomatic back channels, through the United Nations, and through intermediary nations. By most accounts, those protests received no substantive response from Washington. Some veteran diplomatic analysts argue that the United States has spent years systematically pushing the boundaries of freedom of navigation, operations in the Strait, not merely to protect commercial shipping, but as a deliberate pressure campaign designed to provoke Iranian miscalculation and justify a harder military posture in the region. There is also a domestic political dimension inside Iran that cannot be ignored. The IRGC has long operated with its own institutional agenda, one that does not always align perfectly with the broader Iranian government's diplomatic calculations. Some regional analysts suggest this strike may reflect internal Iranian power dynamics as much as it reflects a coherent foreign policy decision. Furthermore, questions are already emerging within Washington's own policy community about whether the helicopter patrol routes were unnecessarily provocative and whether escalation warnings from regional partners were adequately heeded. These are uncomfortable questions, but they are the right questions. Understanding how this crisis was built by both sides may be the only path toward preventing what comes next. What happens in the Strait of Hormuz does not stay in the Strait of Hormuz. Within hours of the incident, global oil markets reacted violently. Crude prices surged sharply as traders priced in the possibility of sustained military conflict disrupting Persian Gulf shipping lanes. Energy analysts are already warning that a prolonged confrontation could push gasoline prices in the United States to levels not seen in recent memory, hitting American families directly at the pump and compounding existing inflationary pressures across the economy. The military consequences are equally severe. U.S. Central Command has almost certainly begun repositioning additional naval and air assets toward the region. Aircraft carrier strike groups on standby are likely being placed on accelerated deployment orders. NATO allies with Persian Gulf equities, including the United Kingdom, France, and others, are being urgently consulted. Geopolitically, the shockwaves extend far beyond the Middle East. And Moscow will be watching closely, calculating whether American military attention and resources are now being pulled away from Ukraine. Beijing will be recalibrating its own Taiwan Strait calculus. Every adversary of the United States just received a significant intelligence data point about American vulnerability. For America's Gulf allies, including Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Israel, and Bahrain, the psychological impact is profound. The credibility of American deterrence in the region has been directly challenged. And for ordinary Americans, the consequences are immediate and personal touching: energy prices, military deployments, and the shadow of a conflict that could reshape global stability for a generation. This is no longer a distant geopolitical story. This is arriving at your doorstep. The next 72 hours will be decisive. Watch for these critical developments. Emergency sessions at the United Nations Security Council are expected to be convened imminently. U.S. congressional leadership is already demanding classified briefings from the Pentagon and the intelligence community. Diplomatic back channels through Oman and Qatar. Historically, the two nations that have facilitated quiet U.S.-Iran communications are almost certainly operating at maximum intensity right now. Here is what we know with certainty. 5 American military helicopters were destroyed over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's IRGC has claimed direct responsibility. The Pentagon is in crisis mode. Global oil markets are reacting. And the entire Middle East regional security architecture is trembling. Here is what remains uncertain: American casualty figures, the precise chain of command that authorized this strike inside Tehran, and most critically, how Washington chooses to respond. 2 scenarios now define the path forward. In the first scenario, back channel diplomacy succeeds and both sides step back from the edge. A fragile but functional de-escalation is negotiated quietly with enormous political costs on both sides. In the second scenario, Washington responds militarily. Iran retaliates. The strait closes. Oil markets collapse. And a regional conflict ignites, with consequences that extend far beyond anything either side calculated or intended. History is being written in real time over those 21 miles of water. Which scenario unfolds depends on decisions being made right now behind closed doors by people whose names we may never know. Stay informed, stay engaged, subscribe to this channel for continuous updates as this crisis develops, because this story is far from over.